Have you ever wondered how you'd survive a single day in a medieval city, surrounded not by taxi drivers or delivery couriers, but by water carriers sloshing through muddy alleyways, by town builders chiseling stone beneath creaking scaffolds, and by royal servants dodging temperamental monarchs with surprising grace? Imagine waking up in the heart of 14th century Europe, Florence, or London, perhaps where every profession, no matter how obscure, played a strange and mighty role in holding society together. If you like drifting into the gentle chaos of forgotten worlds, please like this video and comment where you're watching from. Your support helps this channel bring history to your bedtime. Tonight's story is set at the peak of the late Middle Ages, 1350 to 1450. You're about to walk in the shoes of a water carrier, a city builder, and a royal servant, breathing the dust and tasting the cold reality of their lives. But here's a twist. Did you know that most people then drank weak beer instead of water because water was so risky? Yet entire professions grew around fetching, testing, and sometimes blessing water itself. So, how would you fare if you traded out your hot shower for a bucket of chilly, questionable water? Let's enter the medieval city together. What's the first thing you feel as you step onto the uneven cobblestones of a medieval city just before sunrise? Sharp, damp air nips at your skin. The sky is a bruised gray, walls looming close like silent sentinels. You blink into the gloom and see shifting figures wrapped in coarse flaxen cloaks the color of old oatmeal, frayed at every seam. The faint but persistent scent of wood smoke mixes with something less pleasant, open sewage leaking out from behind a row of merchant houses, a scent both acrid and somehow thick, as if it coats your throat. Your feet, encased in rough leather shoes that have never been properly waterproofed, slip occasionally on the slippery stone, made slick by last night's drizzle. The moisture seeps through, numbing your toes within moments. Behind you, a water carrier grunts, his yoke heavy across his shoulders, buckets sloshing brackish water as he negotiates the maze of head-high carts, barrels, chickens scattering with indignant squawks, and the chaos of dawn. Sound pulses all around you. Roosters cry from unseen coops. Distant church bells toll the hour of prime. Wheels creak and groan on wooden wagons. And now and then, the rising laughter of children darting between shadows, pretending the mud is a battlefield or a castle moat. Hooves clatter on stone. A woman shouts at her apprentice. A dog barks, thin and urgent. The city is alive, but you're aware every breath is filtered through layers of wood smoke, sweat, and something faintly metallic. The cold is sharp, but not yet bitter. It's a cold that promises to deepen as the day wears on without sun. Cold fingers numb your grip as you fumble a copper penny, trading it for a scoop of water from Old Wim's bucket. The penny is worn smooth, barely recognizable as currency. The water is cold, so cold it makes your teeth ache slightly as you drink. Medieval water, it's not Evian, but to complain is to show weakness unbefitting a city dweller. Some mornings, a sharp tang of mold betrays yesterday's rainwater. On others, you catch the bitter edge of lime where the city builders have repaired the nearby aqueduct. Today it tastes faintly of iron and something you can't quite name. You don't ask. Emotionally, you feel at once overwhelmed and oddly invigorated, caught between a strange disgust for the filth and a curiosity about how anyone makes this work day after day, year after year. The city's humidity clings to your skin. Your cloak, damp from the morning fog, feels heavier than it did when you put it on. A merchant's shop, a butcher's, you think emits waves of warmth and the sharp copper scent of fresh blood. The contrast makes you shiver. Just beyond, a baker's oven sends forth the only truly pleasant smell: brown bread, yeast, the promise of warmth. If you think modern cities are crowded, try standing in a medieval marketplace where every inch of space serves a purpose, where nothing is wasted and everything smells like everyone and everything else. It's claustrophobic and alive. You feel the press of humanity, not in a threatening way, but in a way that reminds you that you're part of something larger than yourself. Humor? Imagine modern plumbing, then lose it for good. If you want to wash your hands, you better enjoy the sensation of being cleaner than your neighbor, not cleaner than clean. Water carriers aren't judged by purity, but by speed and willingness to carry. One man's questionable well water is another man's profitable morning. It's harsh, brutal, but undeniably real. And somehow, as you stand there in the gathering light, you begin to understand that these people, the carriers, the builders, the servants, have made peace with it. Not happiness, perhaps, but a kind of grim acceptance mixed with occasional joy. Today you have sinks, pipes, hot water on demand, and you barely give water a thought unless something goes wrong. Then, fetching water was a daily gamble, a job, and sometimes a last-ditch prayer to saints whose names no one quite remembered. Could you handle the constant uncertainty, the knowledge that a single contaminated bucket could kill your family? It's easy to forget just how much effort simple survival requires. Your comfort, you realize, was bought with their daily struggle for water and warmth. Every luxury you possess is built on the foundation of their labor. Let's see what those daily jobs actually entailed for water carriers, town builders, and royal servants. Let's follow them through their morning routines. Ever tried carrying 60 pounds of water, dodging pigs, carts, and noblemen with your pay depending on delivering every last drop? You wake, if you can call it waking, in the cold gray light that filters through the single small window of your shared room. There are 4 of you here. Yourself, Old Wim, a tanner's apprentice, and a boy whose name you've never learned. The floor is packed, earth-covered with straw. It's not truly floor, it's compressed chaos. Your back aches before you even rise. Old Wim is already moving, his joints cracking like a ship's timbers in a storm. He's been a water carrier for 43 years, ever since he was 8 years old. His hands are permanently curled, as if still gripping phantom buckets. His knees bend with the particular weariness of a man who has carried weight his entire life. The water carriers gather at the municipal well just as the sun breaks through the clouds, a brief, blessed moment of clarity. The well is the heart of the city, where water is drawn and distributed. This morning, there are 12 carriers here, jostling for position. The well master, a stern woman named Margaret, oversees the drawing. She knows every carrier by sight and by reputation. If you're known for spilling, you don't get to work the premium routes. The buckets themselves are wooden, bound with iron hoops. They smell of mold and previous cargo, not always water. Sometimes they've carried ale or fish brine. The wood is stained dark from decades of use. Each bucket weighs perhaps 7 or 8 pounds when empty, and 60 pounds when full. The yoke, the wooden beam that rests across your shoulders, is worn smooth by thousands of bodies before you. As you settle the yoke across your shoulders, you feel the familiar pain bloom immediately. Your neck and upper back cry out in protest, though you've been a carrier for only 3 weeks. Old Wim moves with an efficiency born of endless repetition. He doesn't cringe. His body has learned to accept pain as the price of work. The scent of the water changes depending on recent weather. This morning, after last night's rain, it's relatively fresh, which is to say, the smell of wet stone and something vaguely earthy. On dry mornings, when the well has been drawn down to lower depths, the water carries hints of sulfur or minerals. Sometimes, in high summer, there's a faint green tinge and a smell like stagnant vegetation. You don't dwell on what that means. The sounds of the morning route are a complex symphony, hooves on stone, your breath heavy with exertion, the slight splashing of water as you navigate the streets, shopkeepers sweeping their storefronts, calling greetings to regulars, a smith's hammer, distant but steady, children laughing, someone arguing about the price of bread. Your route today is to the houses of minor nobility and wealthy merchants, the ones who can afford fresh water delivered, the ones who need it for their households. Cooking, cleaning, the washing of hands before meals. You're paid per bucket, which means the faster you move, the more you earn. But you also must be careful. A spilled bucket is a lost profit and a black mark on your reputation. The streets are narrow, often barely wide enough for a cart and a person. You learn to move in a strange gliding walk, your knees bent slightly, your core engaged in ways you never knew possible. One slip would mean disaster, not just lost water, but the risk of a twisted ankle or a collision with someone important. At the first house, a servant comes out with a copper coin. You pour water into their household barrel, not into their well, which might be contaminated with minerals, but into a barrel that serves as a buffer. The servant barely glances at you. You are, in effect, invisible. This is not a hardship. It's the nature of the work. Servants and water carriers occupy similar social strata necessary, but not noticed. The second house brings a different challenge. A nobleman's wife demands water from the deep well, not the surface. You explain that all water from the municipal well is treated equally. She frowns, as if you've personally insulted her. You offer to go back and fetch water specifically from the deepest draw of the day. You know it won't be different, but the gesture matters. She softens slightly and adds an extra copper coin. This is wisdom earned through repetition. Sometimes the job isn't about water, but about the appearance of service. By midday, your shoulders burn with a specific, localized fire. The pain isn't sharp. It's a dull, encompassing ache that makes you feel as though you're being slowly crushed. Your feet have developed blisters, despite the leather protection. The sun, which seemed so distant this morning, now beats down on the city streets, turning the cobblestones warm and making the water in your buckets slightly less cold. Emotionally, you feel a strange mixture of pride and resignation. The work is honest. Your back is straight well, straighter than many, and you've earned 17 copper coins this morning. In a city where a loaf of bread costs half a copper coin and a night's shared lodging costs a quarter, you're doing relatively well. There's dignity in that, even if no one acknowledges it. The humor lies in the absurdities. A noblewoman asking if the water has been blessed by a priest, you suggest she commission a blessing herself if she's concerned. A merchant suggested that today's water should be slightly cleaner because the well seems quieter. Whims aside to you, quiet and dry. If water carriers were paid by the joke instead of the bucket, we'd all be rich. Today, if you want water, you turn on the tap. A complex system of pipes, pressure, and human engineering delivers it instantly. Medieval water carriers were the pipeline human conduits carrying the city's lifeblood, one heavy step at a time. Could you trade a morning commute for carrying 300 pounds on your shoulders? The water carrier's profession teaches you something essential about medieval society. Every person, no matter how humble or overlooked, is essential. The city cannot function without these invisible workers. Their invisibility isn't a shame, it's a kind of freedom. But water carriers aren't the only ones rebuilding the medieval city. Up above, on wooden scaffolding, town builders are doing the work that will outlast all of them. Have you ever considered what it takes to build a cathedral when you don't have power tools, cranes, or safety regulations? You climb. The scaffold beneath your feet is constructed of wood lashed together with rope and wooden pegs. It sways slightly in the morning breeze, not enough to be dangerous, but enough to remind you that you're 70 feet above the ground, perched on the eastern wall of the cathedral under construction. The master mason, a man called Heinrich with a face permanently weathered the color of old stone, points to where the next course of stone must be placed. The stones are massive, some weighing over a ton. They've been quarried 5 miles outside the city and transported here by cart, a journey that took 4 days and required 6 oxen. The smell of the construction site is distinct and oddly pleasant. Fresh stone dust, sharp and mineral bright. The sweat of men working in close quarters. The earthy scent of the mortar, a mixture of lime, sand, and water which will set harder than anything you've ever touched. Below, in the streets, you hear the sounds of the city fading into the background. Up here, the dominant sound is the tap, tap, tap of chisels against stone, a rhythm that has continued for the past 3 years and will continue for another 2 at least. Your hands are calloused in a way that water carriers' hands never quite achieve. Where their hands are soft and perpetually damp, yours are hard as horns and stained white with lime dust. The dust works its way into your lungs throughout the day. By evening, when you cough up pale phlegm that tastes of minerals and time. The cathedral under construction is a statement of faith and ambition. Its scale is almost incomprehensible. Begun in 1387, it won't be finished until 1469. No single person will see its completion. You're part of a work that is larger than your lifetime, larger than your grandchildren's lifetime. This is both humbling and oddly comforting. You're part of something permanent. The work requires an understanding of geometry that many educated men don't possess. Heinrich, the master mason, has studied in Italy and knows the principles of the pointed arch, the flying buttress, the distribution of weight across vast distances. But his knowledge is partly practical, partly intuitive. He'll often stand and stare at a section of wall for 15 minutes, speaking to no one, then suddenly announce precisely where the next stone must be placed. You're not yet a master mason. You're an apprentice. Perhaps 10 years into a 15-year apprenticeship, you know how to prepare stone, how to mix mortar, how to read the language of chisel marks and water lines. You know that a stone placed wrong will cause cascading failures down the line. You understand, viscerally, that haste is the enemy of permanence. The physical sensation of the work is overwhelming. Your arms burn from holding chisels steady while others strike the mallets. The vibration travels up your bones. Occasionally, a stone slips or cracks unexpectedly, and the moment of panic, the sudden awareness that an entire section might collapse, never quite fades. But here's what strikes you most. These builders aren't being paid fortunes. They're earning perhaps slightly more than water carriers, but they're also putting themselves at constant risk. Why do men choose to labor on scaffolds, knowing that a single misstep means death? The answer, you discover, lies in the permanence. A water carrier's work is consumed or forgotten by evening. A builder's work stands for centuries, a silent testimony to craft and ambition. That matters to the men doing it, even if no one will ever know their names. But permanence in stone is only one form of service. In the great halls and manors, royal servants navigate a different kind of permanence, the complex, fragile permanence of favor and expectation. Imagine working for someone whose mood can cost you your position, your reputation, and potentially your life. That's the reality for royal servants in the late Middle Ages. You wake before dawn, not at dawn, but deliberately before, because the royal household runs on a schedule that few outside of it can fathom. The kitchen must be ready for breakfast preparation by the time the Lord's personal attendants begin their work. You must have water heated, linens prepared, the morning fire burning hot and clean. You are one of perhaps 30 servants in this manor house. The hierarchy is complex and strictly enforced. There are scullery servants, the lowest, kitchen servants, hall servants, chamber servants, and the personal attendants who work directly for the lord or lady. You're attempting to rise from scullery to kitchen status, a transition that depends on favor, opportunity, and sometimes pure luck. The kitchen is a chamber of controlled chaos. The head cook, Mistress Eleanor, runs it with the precision of a military commander. She's been cooking for this household for 32 years and has survived the reigns of 2 lords and their wives. She knows how to navigate the treacherous waters of noble preference and expectation. More importantly, she knows which mistakes are forgivable and which are career-ending. This morning, the Lord is in a particular mood. One of the servants noticed it before dawn, the way he spoke curtly to his chamberlain, the way his jaw was set. When a noble is in such a mood, the entire household adjusts. Conversations are quieter. Movements are more precise. Mistakes become catastrophes. Your task this morning is to prepare the Lord's breakfast. A portion of bread, aged cheese, small beer, safer than water, and fresh fruit if the winter stores have any left. It's simple food, but simplicity is deceptive. The bread must be perfectly toasted, not too dark, not too pale. The cheese must be sliced to an exact thickness. The beer must be at precisely the right temperature, served in a specific cup. The smell of the kitchen is overwhelming. Smoke from the fire, the yeasty scent of bread baking, the metallic tang of the hanging meat, onions being prepared for the evening meal, herbs dried and hanging from the rafters. Your eyes water slightly from the smoke. The heat from the cooking fires is intense, and your face feels perpetually flushed. The sounds are constant. Water boiling, pots clanging, Eleanor directing tasks in a low but authoritative voice, the younger servants working in near silence, afraid of drawing attention. Now and then, footsteps overhead, the Lord moving through his chambers, and everyone tenses, waiting to see if a summons will come. Your hands are perpetually damp and hot. Your apron is stained with a history of meals, flour, dust, grease, occasionally blood. Your fingernails are perpetually broken, your palms marked with small burn scars. The heat from the ovens leaves your forearms red and painful by midday. Emotionally, you exist in a state of controlled anxiety. Part of you is proud of your skill. You're becoming genuinely good at this work. You can judge doneness by smell and sound. You understand flavor combinations intuitively. But another part of you is always listening for the summons that never comes quite when expected, always waiting for the criticism that will confirm your deepest fear, that you're not good enough, that you'll be sent back to the scullery or cast out entirely. When you finally carry the breakfast to the Lord's chamber, you move carefully, deliberately. The bread is on the left, cheese on the right, and beer in the center. You set it down with a slight bow, eyes averted. The Lord doesn't look at you. Servants aren't truly seen, aren't truly present in the consciousness of nobles, but you feel his presence like a weight. This bread is cold, he says quietly. Your stomach drops. The bread is not cold. You've kept it warm, but his perception is reality at this moment. You apologize immediately. Prepare to remove it. It will do, he adds, already distracted, turning toward a window. You retreat, your heart still racing. That small criticism, true or not, is a reminder of your precariousness. At any moment, by any measure, you can fail. The rest of your day involves cleaning the chamber after the meal, washing linens, preparing for the evening, and staying ready for any summons. Eleanor teaches you quietly, between tasks. She shows you how to read a noble's mood by the way they hold their silverware. She teaches you which lords prefer salt on their food and which prefer it served separately. She teaches you In essence, how to be invisible while being absolutely essential. By evening, your feet ache, your hands are raw, your nerves are frayed, but you've survived another day. Tomorrow, the Lord might be in a better mood, or worse, there's no way to predict. That uncertainty is the constant background of your existence. The humor is dark and shared only with other servants, in whispered conversations after the household sleeps. You joke about nobles who complain that their food is too food-like, or who demand that water taste less like water. You mock their moods, their sudden fancies, their inability to understand that servants are human beings and not magical creatures that can change their moods on whim. But beneath the humor is a genuine understanding. You're part of a machine, and that machine requires your effort. The household couldn't function without you. That knowledge is both a source of pride and source of endless anxiety. Today, if your boss is in a bad mood, you can stay home sick or, at worst, deal with professional distance. Medieval servants lived in the household, worked without contracts or protections, and could be dismissed without cause, left with no references and no prospect of employment elsewhere. Your entire future depended on pleasing someone whose moods were entirely beyond your control or understanding. The servant's life teaches you about power and powerlessness, but it also teaches you about resilience. These people developed intricate skills reading mood, managing expectations, finding satisfaction in small moments of competence. They turned invisibility into a kind of superpower. Let's move deeper into the interconnected world of these three professions, exploring how they sometimes intersect and how their work shapes the fabric of medieval society. You might think that water carriers, town builders, and royal servants exist in separate worlds, but medieval society, despite its rigid hierarchies, was deeply interconnected. These professions overlapped, influenced each other, and created a kind of ecosystem of labor that sustained the entire social structure. Consider the town builder Heinrich the Master Mason. He's not precisely of low status, but he's not quite noble either. He occupies a middle ground that medieval society found both necessary and troubling. He has specialized knowledge that no amount of noble birth can confer. Because of this, he has a kind of security that many don't. If his cathedral is successful, if it stands, if it impresses, his reputation travels. He might be commissioned for another project in another city, but his success depends on the water carrier. The water carrier brings fresh water to the construction site, water needed to mix mortar, to cool the workers in summer heat, to clean tools and injuries. If the water carrier is unreliable, the mortar sets incorrectly. Entire sections might fail. The water carrier, in turn, depends on the royal servants. When the lord or lady drinks water, when they order their servants to deliver water to guests, they create demand. That demand translates to more customers, more routes, higher income. The water carrier exists because water is needed, and water is needed because the noble household requires it. The royal servant depends on the town builder in a different way. The manor house or castle where the servant works, the very structure was built by men like Heinrich. The servant works within a building that is itself a product of professional craft. The servant doesn't think about this connection, but it's there. These aren't just economic connections. There are social and practical intersections as well. A water carrier might supply water to the construction site and to the noble's household. He learns gossip from both places, becomes, in a sense, a node in the communication network of the city. News travels through water carriers more quickly than through official channels. A servant might encounter a town builder at the market or in the street. There's a kind of professional courtesy between them, recognition that both are skilled laborers, both are essential to society, both occupy that complex middle ground between true poverty and true wealth. Occasional moments of actual cooperation occur. A town builder might hire water carriers when his project requires massive amounts of water for mortar. The royal household might commission repairs to the castle, bringing builders and servants into direct contact. During these moments, the hierarchies shift slightly. The water carrier is still below the builder, but they're working toward a common goal. The scent of the city carries these connections, literally. The dust of construction mixes with the smell of cooking food and the scent of water drawn from wells. The sounds builders' hammers, servants' footsteps, water carriers' calls create a kind of urban symphony that's unique to each city. Emotionally, each profession understands, perhaps not consciously, but in the bones, that they're part of something larger. They're nodes in a network. They matter to each other in ways that don't involve direct communication or even conscious recognition. The humor lies in the small ironies. A town builder complaining that water carriers are overcharging, while the water carrier complains that the builder's project is disrupting the usual routes. A servant noticed that the water tastes different on construction days, the dust carried by it. A water carrier joking that the noble household uses enough water to float a cathedral. How much do we think about the intricate networks of people and skills that keep our lives functioning? Medieval people were aware of these connections, perhaps more than we are, because everything was more visible, more immediate. These networks also meant that the failures of one profession had ripple effects. When water ran short, when construction projects were halted, when the noble household changed, the entire system shifted. What happens when the systems that keep the city functioning fail? Summer 1374. The city is experiencing a drought. The wells are running low, and the quality of the water is deteriorating rapidly. This isn't a minor inconvenience, it's a crisis that threatens the city's foundations. For water carriers like Old Wim, the crisis is both an opportunity and nightmare. There's more demand for water than ever, but the water itself is increasingly hard to find. Wells that were reliable for years suddenly run low by midday. The water that does come up smells strongly of minerals and, occasionally, of something undefined and troubling. Wim suspects contamination, but has no way to test or prove it. He begins making longer journeys to wells further outside the city, adding hours to his working day. His shoulders, which have ached for decades, now scream with a more acute pain. His knees, which have held up through his entire life, begin to give way. One morning, he can barely stand. He forces himself through the day, knowing that if he stops, if he shows weakness, younger men will take over his routes. He'll be too old, too broken to recover. The water he's carrying now is cloudy with particulates. He explains to customers that this is temporary, that the city is experiencing unusual circumstances. Some accept it, others complain, refuse payment, or worse, they report him to the city authorities, suggesting he's delivering contaminated water deliberately. He's brought before a magistrate and must defend his work. He's cleared of charges, but the experience leaves him shaken and older than before. Meanwhile, the town builders face their own crisis. Without adequate water, mortar doesn't set properly. The cathedral project, which has been progressing steadily, suddenly hits an obstacle. Entire sections of work must be halted. Heinrich, the master mason, is consulting with the Lord about delaying the project until water is more readily available. For the workers on the scaffold, this means uncertainty. Will they continue to be paid? Will the project resume? Heinrich has been through droughts before. He's 48 years old and has been working in construction for 30 years, but each crisis forces him to confront the fragility of his position. The noble patron could lose interest. The project could be abandoned. He could lose his reputation. The work that's been completed so far, 3 years of careful stone laying, begins to worry him. In weather and without the proper maintenance of mortar, cracks can develop. The structure, which should be eternal, might be damaged by this temporary crisis. That knowledge eats at him. The royal household faces its own version of the crisis. The noble's wife is furious that her baths are being rationed. The kitchen is struggling to prepare food adequately. Wine, which requires some water in its preparation, is becoming less available. The servants bear the brunt of the lord's and lady's frustration. You, if you're a servant in this household, find yourself caught between impossible demands. The lady wants her bath, but water is precious. You must either disappoint her or betray the city by hoarding water that others need. The compromise is a bath with less water than usual, leaving the lady feeling unsatisfied and resentful. The scent of the city changes during the drought. Without adequate water for cleaning, the streets smell more acrid, more loaded with the smells of unwashed people, inadequate sanitation, and desperation. The dust is thicker. Construction sites smell like dry stone and minerals, harsh and choking. The kitchen smells of rationed food, preserved vegetables, and the faint tang of spices used to mask the taste of aging meat. The sounds change too. Fewer water carriers call their routes, fewer of them have water to carry. The constant splash of buckets becomes intermittent. Builders' hammers are less frequent, the rhythm disrupted. In the kitchen, there's more silence, more tension, fewer of the normal sounds of productive work. Physically, everyone is weakened by the drought. Dehydration is masked by habit, by the acceptance that water is scarce, but it takes its toll. Focus becomes harder to maintain. Tempers fray more easily. Patience becomes a luxury. Workers become slightly slower, slightly less precise, slightly more prone to mistakes. The emotional weight of the crisis presses down on everyone. There's fear that this will become permanent. There's anger at the situation and at those perceived to be at fault. There's a grim determination to continue working, because what else is there to do? Stopping is not an option. The city's authorities hold meetings about potential solutions. Some suggest digging new wells. Others propose bringing water from further away. A few suggest rationing, officially limiting who gets water and how much. Debates rage about whether this is a temporary situation or the beginning of permanent decline. In reality, within 6 weeks, autumn rains come. The wells refill. The crisis passes as suddenly as it began. Water carriers resume their normal routes. The town builders restart their project, grateful that the paused work shows no permanent damage. The royal household returns to its normal consumption patterns. But everyone, the water carrier, the builder, the servant, carries the memory of the crisis forward. They know, in a way that only lived experience can teach, how fragile the systems are that keep civilization functioning. Today, if we face a water shortage, we have alternative supplies, bottled water, and emergency protocols. We have governments that can coordinate responses. Medieval people faced uncertainty without such support. Their resilience came from acceptance and determination rather than from institutional frameworks. The drought teaches you that everyone is connected and that everyone's survival depends on the survival of the systems that bind them together. The water carrier, the builder, the servant, they're not separate from each other or from the crisis. They're part of a whole that can be disrupted by forces beyond anyone's control. Disasters aren't the only challenges these professions face. Daily dangers, subtle and not so subtle, shape the lives of water carriers, builders, and servants. Every profession in the medieval period carried risks that we, in our modern safety-conscious world, can barely imagine. For water carriers, the primary danger is physical breakdown. The constant, repetitive motion of carrying weight creates injuries that accumulate over a lifetime. A carrier might develop what we'd now call repetitive strain injuries, but which then appeared as chronic pain, stiffness, and gradual immobility. There's no treatment, no physical therapy, only acceptance and the knowledge that at some point you'll be too broken to continue. There's also the risk of slipping. Medieval streets are treacherous, uneven cobblestones, mud, ice in winter, human and animal waste. A slip while carrying full buckets can mean a twisted ankle, a broken leg, or worse. If you're injured and can't work, you have no income. If the injury is severe enough, you might never work again. That prospect hangs over every water carrier's life. For town builders, the danger is more immediate and more potentially catastrophic. Falls from scaffolding are regular occurrences. Some result in injuries, some in death. A builder might take precautions, moving carefully, ensuring the scaffold is secure, but accidents happen. A rope breaks. A piece of wooden scaffolding fails unexpectedly. A moment of inattention near the edge. There's also the danger of respiratory disease. Stone dust, breathed in daily for years, damages the lungs. Builders often develop chronic coughs, difficulty breathing, and shortened lifespans. This is the price of the work, paid in health over decades. Royal servants face a different sort of danger, the danger of sudden dismissal, of losing their position due to circumstances entirely beyond their control. A noble's mood changes. A new lady arrives and brings her own servants. The household encounters financial difficulties and must reduce staff. A servant can be cast out with no warning and no prospect of employment. Perhaps most striking is that workers often had no legal recourse for injury. If a builder fell from scaffolding and was injured, he might receive a day's pay as compensation or nothing at all. The logic was that he'd accepted the risk by taking the job. His injury was his own responsibility. This might seem shockingly harsh from a modern perspective, but it reflects a fundamental difference in how medieval society viewed work, risk, and responsibility. You took a job not because it was safe, but because you needed income. The risks were part of the deal, acknowledged but not formally protected against. Despite these dangers, or perhaps because of them, these professions developed their own cultures, their own ways of coping with adversity. How do people survive in harsh conditions with inadequate compensation and constant danger? They create cultures that help them cope. The water carriers have their gathering places, specific wells, specific corners of the market where they congregate during the slow hours of midday. Here, they share information, which nobles are good payers, which routes have changed, where new wells have been discovered. But more importantly, they share stories and humor. The humor is dark and specific. They joke about nobles who demand water blessed by the priest, or who complain that water tastes too much like water. They laugh at the absurdities they encounter daily. The merchant who wants to purchase water on credit, the child who nearly drowns himself in a rain barrel. They exchange stories of near disasters, of buckets caught in cartwheels, of times they slipped but didn't fall, moments that could have been catastrophic but were merely embarrassing. In this humor, there's resilience, the ability to laugh at your situation, to find levity in difficulty, is a form of power. It's saying, yes, this is hard. Yes, it's dangerous. Yes, it's often humiliating, but we're still here, still functioning, still able to find reasons to smile. Old Wim, despite his aching back and his knees that barely function, is known for his jokes. He has a catchphrase when someone complains about the cold water. Better cold than hot. At least you can tell it's water. The other carriers laugh because they understand the reference. Stories, possibly apocryphal, about contaminated wells where the water was warm, a sign of decay or worse. The town builders have their own culture, their own hierarchy of respect. Master masons are at the top, respected for their knowledge and their ability to manage complex projects. Below them are experienced builders, then apprentices, then laborers. The respect is earned through demonstrated skill and the ability to produce work that lasts. On the construction site, there's a particular camaraderie that comes from working together on something dangerous and difficult. The builders develop a language of their own specific terms for types of stone, techniques of joining, methods of measuring and calculating. To learn this language is to become part of the community. The humor is similar to the carriers, dark, specific, filled with references to their particular situations. They joke about disasters narrowly averted, about nobles who understand nothing of what they're doing, about the eternal complaining of workers lower in the hierarchy. There's a famous joke about a noble who visits a construction site, asks how long until completion, and is told, a year. He visits again 2 months later, sees the same amount of progress, and is told a year. The joke is that construction operates on its own time, indifferent to expectations, but beneath the humor is genuine skill and pride. These men understand that what they're building will outlast them by centuries. That's not something you can say about most medieval professions. That permanence, that knowledge that your work will be remembered, even if you won't, matters profoundly to how they see themselves. Royal servants develop their own culture, perhaps most of all. They exist in close quarters, in a household that functions as a kind of family, however dysfunctional. Servants working together for decades develop relationships that rival any blood relationship. They understand each other's quirks, strengths, weaknesses. They know which servant can calm the lady's temper and which one's presence only exacerbates it. The humor is pointed, cutting, and deeply protective. Servants mock the nobles they serve with a tenderness that suggests genuine affection mixed with exasperation. They have stories about the lord's foolishness, the lady's unreasonable demands, the visiting nobleman who didn't understand that servants aren't mind readers. But these stories are told only among themselves, only in the safety of the kitchen or the servants' quarters. The culture of servants values loyalty, discretion, and the ability to handle crises with grace. A good servant is one who anticipates needs before they're expressed, who understands moods and responds appropriately, who never breaks silence inappropriately or betrays secrets. This culture isn't written down or formally taught. It's absorbed through living it, through observing older servants, through the direct consequences of mistakes. There's also a particular form of contentment that emerges from successful service. When a meal is prepared perfectly and the Lord expresses satisfaction, when the household runs smoothly despite challenges, there's a quiet sense of accomplishment. The servant recognizes that they've been part of making something work, of creating order and beauty in a difficult situation. Scent plays a role in culture too. The particular smell of a well-run kitchen, with specific herbs and cooking methods, becomes comforting to servants who work there daily. The dust and stone smell of a construction site becomes the smell of honest work to a builder. The specific mix of various waters and routes becomes, for a carrier, the smell of knowledge and skill. Modern workplaces develop cultures too, but they're often mediated through formal structures, HR departments, team-building exercises, official policies. Medieval workplace cultures were entirely organic, emerging from necessity and proximity rather than planning. These cultures weren't merely ways to cope with difficulty, they were ways to transform difficult circumstances into sources of meaning and identity. To be a water carrier wasn't just to carry water. It was to be part of a community that understood struggle and found dignity in work. Let's turn our attention to the rare moments where these professions intersect more directly, where the separation between water carriers, builders, and servants dissolves into collaboration. Every few years, a major construction project reaches a significant milestone: a cathedral's roof completed, a castle wall finished. These moments call for celebrations, feasts organized by the noble patron to acknowledge the work and honor the craftspeople involved. Imagine the scene. The new stone roof of the cathedral section is completed. It's a significant achievement, years of work culminating in a structure that will hopefully outlast everyone present. The Lord, who commissioned and partially funded the work, organizes a feast to celebrate. This is one of the rare moments where water carriers, builders, and royal servants explicitly interact within a formal context. The water carriers are hired to deliver large quantities of fresh water to the cathedral courtyard, where long tables have been set up. The builders are the guests of honor, seated at the high table if they're masters, or at secondary tables if they're apprentices or laborers. The servants from the Lord's household coordinate everything. The water carriers don't participate in the actual feast. They remain on the periphery, ensuring that water is continuously available, that pitchers are filled, that guests never lack for drink, but they observe. They see the builders being treated with something approaching respect, their skills acknowledged. They watch as the Lord makes a brief speech about permanence and craftsmanship. Old Wim, serving water to one of the master builders, hears him talk about the durability of the roof they've just completed. It will last 500 years, the master says, possibly 1,000. Long after all of us are dust, people will eat and sleep under this roof. There's satisfaction in his voice, a kind of peace that comes from knowing his work transcends his lifetime. Wim recognizes this. He'll never build anything lasting, but he understands the sentiment. He's been carrying water for 43 years, and in that time, he's served thousands of people. Some of them wouldn't be alive without his water. That's a kind of permanence too, invisible and uncounted, but real. The servants, for their part, are orchestrating the entire feast. They're invisible, moving between tables, clearing plates, ensuring everything runs smoothly. The Lord's personal servant stands near the high table, ready to serve or address any need. Other servants keep the cooking fires going, prepare additional food if needed, manage the logistics of feeding 100 people. One of the servants, a young woman named Catherine, who's worked in the household for 5 years, watches the celebration with a particular kind of attention. She's noticed the builder who sits at the third table from the front, a man roughly her age who's been coming to this city for the past few years. She's seen him arrive in spring and leave in late autumn. She's never spoken to him, but she's aware of him in the way that people in close quarters become aware of each other. At this moment, during the celebration, their eyes meet briefly. There's a moment of recognition, of awareness. It dissipates quickly. She looks away, focusing on her work, but it exists. In a rigid society with limited social mobility, this moment is both utterly ordinary, two people noticing each other, and quite extraordinary, the only moment their worlds genuinely intersect. The feast ends as evening falls. The water carriers pack their equipment and return to their homes. The builders gather their tools and prepare for the next phase of work. The servants clean up the remnants of the celebration, store the dishes, and restore the courtyard to its normal state. By morning, almost no trace of the event remains, except in the memories of those who participated. These rare moments of explicit intersection reveal something essential about medieval society. The hierarchies were rigid, but they were also permeable. A servant could occasionally make eye contact with someone from a different world. A water carrier could hear, directly from a builder, about the meaning of his work. These moments were rare and fleeting, but they mattered. Let's expand our view and compare how these three professions existed across different medieval cities and regions. Did water carriers, town builders, and royal servants work the same way in Florence as in London, in Prague as in Bruges? Or did each city develop its own particular variations? The answer is nuanced. The fundamental work was the same across medieval Europe, but the context shifted dramatically based on local conditions. In Italian city-states like Florence and Venice, water carriers had to contend with different challenges than their counterparts in northern Europe. Florence, built on the Arno River, had water access but quality challenges due to industry upriver. Venice, surrounded by salt water, had the challenge of finding fresh water on an island city. Carriers in Venice didn't just carry water, they managed one of the city's most precious commodities. In London, which sat on the Thames, the challenge was different. The river was heavily polluted by the city's waste, forcing carriers to seek water from specific wells outside the city proper, adding significant distance to their routes. This is why many wealthy Londoners preferred to receive water delivered from specific clean wells, paying premium prices for the additional distance the carriers had to travel. Town builders operated within different constraints as well. In Italian cities, where stone was plentiful and classical Roman ruins provided inspiration and sometimes materials, builders developed a particular style, emphasizing geometric precision and durable materials. Northern European builders, working in regions with different stone qualities and less Roman influence, developed their own architectural traditions. The northern cathedrals, with their soaring heights and pointed arches, required different techniques than the domed cathedrals of Italy. A master builder in Florence would have different expertise than one working in Cologne. The work was similar, moving and fitting stone, but the specific knowledge required was different. Royal servants experienced perhaps the most significant regional variations. In centralized kingdoms like England or France, where the royal court maintained consistent systems, servants developed standardized practices that could transfer from one noble household to another. In the fragmented Italian city-states, where power was dispersed among merchant families and local nobles, servants operated within more fluid hierarchies. A servant in Venice, working for a merchant family, might have quite different responsibilities than a servant in an English castle working for a king. The merchant's household would be oriented toward commercial matters, trade, and the entertainment of business associates. The royal servant's household would be oriented toward court politics, ceremonial function, and military readiness. The scents, sounds, and emotional textures of each city's water carriers, builders, and servants were shaped by these regional differences. A carrier in Venice might smell salt air mixed with the spices of trade. A builder in Bruges might work with different stone than one in Prague, creating different dust and a different quality of labor. A royal servant in England might work within a more formalized hierarchy than one in Italy. Yet despite these variations, the fundamental reality remained constant. These were invisible workers, essential to the functioning of society, overlooked in official records and chronicles, yet absolutely necessary. What does it mean that we know so much less about these people than about their noble employers, even though their work was in many ways more complex and more essential? The regional variations remind us that medieval society, while having certain consistent features, was not monolithic. Each city, each region, developed its own particular solutions to the problems of survival, work, and social organization. Yet the solutions were all variations on common themes. Let's conclude our journey by reflecting on what these professions teach us about value, work, and society. What does it tell you that the professions most essential to medieval survival were the least valued in medieval society? Water carriers, town builders, and royal servants occupied a strange position in medieval economics. They were essential. Society literally could not function without them, yet they were consistently undervalued, poorly compensated, and socially invisible. An economist looking at medieval cities would note that water carriers were a kind of infrastructure, human pipes moving a vital commodity. Without them, the city would face a crisis within days. A single absence of water carriers, if it lasted more than a week, could threaten the entire population. Yet carriers earned modest incomes, lived in crowded shared spaces, and had no social status. The paradox deepens when you consider that these workers understood something crucial about value that society never fully acknowledged: the difference between intrinsic value and market value. The water they carried had enormous intrinsic value. Without it, people died. But its market value, the price a customer would pay for it, was minimal because it was abundant most of the time, and therefore cheap. Town builders occupied a slightly higher status because their work was visible and obviously impressive. A cathedral took decades to build and would stand for centuries. This permanence gave builders a certain respect that carriers never achieved, yet they too were undercompensated relative to the value they created. The cathedral they were building would serve the city for centuries, generating immeasurable economic and spiritual value. The builder's compensation was a modest wage, a position on a professional ladder, and the knowledge that his work mattered. Royal servants occupied yet another position in this invisible economy. They were the most visible of the three professions to those with power and wealth, yet their value was measured entirely in their ability to serve, to anticipate needs, to make life comfortable for others. They created enormous value. A well-run household was the foundation of a noble's power and status, but that value accrued entirely to the household, not to the servants themselves. The deeper you look at this invisible economy, the more you realize it was actually the foundation of medieval society. The visible economy, the merchants, the nobles, the church sat atop this infrastructure of invisible workers. Remove the carriers, the builders, the servants, and the entire structure would collapse. Yet medieval society had no language for recognizing this fundamental economic truth. The official hierarchies, church, nobility, merchants, were what mattered. Workers were below these categories, mere support for the important people. This invisibility had emotional consequences. It meant that workers rarely received genuine appreciation for their contributions. A noble might thank a servant for a particular service, but it was thank you directed at a function, not at a person. A builder might receive recognition from the master mason or the church, but rarely from the broader society. A carrier was simply part of the street landscape, noticed only by their failure to deliver. The scent of this invisible economy was literally in the air, the smell of water, dust, sweat, and cooking fires that characterized working-class medieval cities. These smells were so constant, so omnipresent, that wealthy people often tried to mask them with perfumes and incense. The goal was to avoid encountering the reality of the workers who made their lives possible. Emotionally, workers internalized this invisibility. They were taught that their work was inherently low status, that they should be grateful for employment at all, that complaints were unseemly. They developed quiet resistance to this system, the humor, the camaraderie, the small acts of pride in work well done, but they never explicitly challenged it. The humor we see in medieval worker cultures carries an edge because it's humor about injustice that will never be remedied. A water carrier jokes about his invisibility because complaining openly would change nothing and might cost him his livelihood. A builder takes pride in permanence because he won't be remembered for his work, but his work will be remembered forever. A servant maintains loyalty to a household that could dismiss him without cause because that's the only structure available to him. What's striking, from a modern perspective, is how much of this invisible economy persists. Service workers remain largely invisible to those they serve. Construction workers are noticed mostly when they're in the way or when something goes wrong. Domestic workers remain among the least valued in modern economies, despite their essential role. We've changed much in 600 years, but not necessarily in how we value the work of people who keep society functioning. The medieval invisible economy teaches us something crucial. The most important work is often invisible, undercompensated, and underappreciated. The people doing this work are not grateful for this situation, but they accept it as the reality of their existence. They maintain dignity through small acts of competence, camaraderie, and humor. We like to think we've progressed from medieval injustice. In many ways, we have labor laws, minimum wages, workplace safety regulations, yet the fundamental structure persists. Those who do essential work remain undervalued relative to those who own, organize, or control the work of others. The invisible economy of medieval cities was not a bug in the system, but a feature. It allowed the visible hierarchy to function. Without an invisible class of workers accepting low pay and low status, the nobility and merchant classes couldn't maintain their position. The invisibility wasn't accidental. It was structural and necessary. Yet invisibility, while preventing recognition, also granted a certain freedom. Most analyses of medieval society emphasize the constraints and hierarchy, but invisibility had an unexpected side effect. Those who were invisible had a particular kind of freedom. Consider Old Wim, the water carrier. He's invisible to the nobility and to most of the merchant class. He has no legal rights to speak of, no formal status, no security, yet in his invisibility, he has a freedom that a noble never enjoys. No one is watching him. No one is judging his behavior according to the complex codes of nobility. He can have friendships across social boundaries. He can speak his mind to other carriers without fear of formal consequence. He can make jokes about nobles without being overheard and punished. The invisibility that prevents him from being valued also prevents him from being controlled completely. A noble has every aspect of his life scrutinized by others of his class. His clothing, his associations, his behavior at court, all are subject to judgment and have serious consequences. Wim's clothing is simple. No one cares. His associations are with other carriers. No one pays attention. His behavior in the street is noted by others like him. No official record is kept. In the spaces of his invisibility, Wim has created a life that has meaning to him and his peers. He's developed skills that matter. He's built relationships that matter. He's learned to find humor and dignity in work that society doesn't value. These are real things, even if they're invisible to society. The town builder Heinrich has a slightly different kind of freedom. His invisibility is less complete, his work is visible, even if he isn't, but it still grants him something valuable. He can move between cities. His skills are portable. If a project ends, he can travel to another city and find work there. The nobility are bound to their lands and titles. Heinrich is bound only by his skills and his reputation among other builders. This mobility creates a kind of freedom. Heinrich can choose, to some extent, which projects interest him. He can work for different patrons. He's not tied to a single place or a single lord. His invisibility to the broader society means that his movements aren't tracked or controlled. The servant Catherine has less freedom in some ways. She's locked into a household, subject to the will of her employers, unable to leave without risking destitution. Yet even she has a kind of freedom within her invisibility. In the servants' quarters, she's a person, not a function. She has friendships, romances conducted quietly, dreams about her future. These are invisible to the household, but they're real to her. More importantly, her invisibility to the formal power structure means she's not subject to the same moral scrutiny as a noble woman would be. A noble woman's behavior is watched constantly, judged against strict codes of propriety. Catherine's behavior is watched by other servants and by her employers only in functional ways. This gives her a certain private space that a noble woman rarely has. The scent of freedom in invisibility is paradoxical. It smells like both constraint and liberation. The dust and sweat of the street, the smoke of the kitchen, the mineral smell of construction sites. These are the smells of people who are not observed, not judged, not formally controlled by the elaborate systems of nobility. Emotionally, invisibility can be painfully isolating, yet it also creates community among the invisible. Water carriers are more friendly with each other than nobles are with their equals. Builders maintain genuine loyalty to their fellow craftspeople. Servants form bonds that approach family. The invisibility that isolates them from the broader society connects them to each other. Is it possible that the freedom of invisibility is worth something, even when it comes attached to hardship and low status? We often pity medieval workers for their lack of rights and recognition, but we might also recognize that invisibility granted them something that highly visible, highly positioned people never fully possess: the freedom to be fully human, to maintain relationships and dignity outside the formal hierarchies of society. As we prepare to end this journey into medieval work and invisibility, let's consider what these professions ultimately meant, both to their own times and to us. What remains of water carriers, town builders, and royal servants from the medieval period? How did their work shape the world we inherit? If you walk through a medieval city today, Florence, Prague, London, you're walking through a landscape shaped by the work of these three professions and countless others like them. The stone buildings are obvious. They're the most visible legacy of medieval town builders. A cathedral that was begun in 1370 and completed in 1460, like some buildings in Northern Europe, has stood for over 550 years. It will likely stand for another 500. The builders who constructed it are long dead, forgotten. Their names aren't recorded anywhere, yet their work is everywhere, permanent and undeniable. But the legacy of builders extends beyond stone. Their work created the very structure of medieval cities. The market squares, the fortification walls, the bridges connecting communities, these aren't just architectural achievements. They're the physical manifestation of social organization. They represent decisions about where to build, how to build, what to prioritize. These decisions ripple across centuries. The legacy of water carriers is less obvious, but equally profound. They established and maintained the water infrastructure of medieval cities. The wells they drew from, the routes they traveled, the systems they helped establish, these influenced how cities developed. A city with good wells, served efficiently by organized carriers, would grow differently than a city without adequate water supply. More importantly, water carriers created knowledge. They knew the city, every street, every route, every customer. This knowledge was encoded in their work, in the paths they traveled, in the information they traded. They were the nodes in the information network of medieval cities. News traveled through water carriers more quickly than through formal channels. The rumor about a coming war, the gossip about a merchant's bankruptcy, the story about a servant's affair, all traveled through the gossip of water carriers. The legacy of royal servants is the most invisible, but perhaps most profound. They created the administrative infrastructure of nobility. A well-run household required a complex system of organization, trust, and understanding between servants and their employers. This system of service became the model for all hierarchical organizations in medieval society. The culture of service that servants created influenced how society understood duty, loyalty, and obligation. The servant's ethic, anticipating needs, maintaining discretion, prioritizing the function over oneself, became part of how medieval society understood work. It influenced how people thought about obligation to their rulers, their church, their society. Across all three professions, the legacy is one of taking difficult work and finding meaning in it. The medieval water carrier, town builder, and royal servant all worked without expecting personal recognition or individual fame. They worked for their community, for the immediate financial compensation, for the respect of their peers. This isn't to say they were happy. We have no evidence that they were, but they made meaning from their work despite the circumstances. The scent of medieval cities, a mixture of building dust, the water drawn from wells, the smoke of cooking fires, was created by the daily work of these professions. That particular smell is gone now, replaced by different odors, but the landscape shaped by these workers remains. Modern cities, if you look carefully, still contain echoes of medieval infrastructure. The wells that supplied medieval water carriers sometimes still exist, incorporated into modern plumbing systems. The stones laid by medieval builders form the foundations of modern buildings, or in some cases, are the actual buildings we still inhabit. The systems of household management created by royal servants influenced how we organize work even now. Perhaps more importantly, the medieval workers' struggle to maintain dignity and meaning in difficult circumstances is a legacy that speaks to modern workers. Delivery drivers, construction workers, domestic workers, service workers, they occupy positions that echo those of medieval professions. They're essential, often invisible, undercompensated relative to the value they create, yet they find meaning and community in their work. The humor that medieval workers developed to cope with injustice and difficulty has its modern echo in the dark humor of contemporary workers. The camaraderie that developed among those doing similar work creates meaning that official recognition cannot. The knowledge that your work is essential, even if unrecognized, is a kind of dignity that transcends formal status. Emotionally, the legacy of medieval workers is a reminder that human meaning-making is independent of formal recognition. You can find value in work that society undervalues. You can build community with others in similar circumstances. You can maintain dignity and humor in difficult situations. These lessons from medieval workers are not historical curiosities. They're relevant to anyone doing work that the world doesn't quite recognize. Modern workers have formal protections, labor laws, and the possibility of upward mobility that medieval workers never had. Yet modern workers sometimes lack the community and meaning-making that medieval workers developed in response to shared hardship. The trade-off isn't simple. The water carriers, town builders, and royal servants of the late medieval period were not heroes. They were ordinary people doing necessary work under difficult circumstances. Their legacy isn't one of triumph or recognition. It's a legacy of endurance, creativity, and the human capacity to find meaning in work, no matter what society says that work is worth. As we bring this journey to a close, let's take a moment to rest and reflect on what we've learned. You've spent hours now walking the muddy streets of a late medieval city, carrying water, laying stone, serving at the pleasure of nobility. You've felt the cold and the heat, smelled the complex layering of odors that made up medieval life, heard the constant soundscape of necessary work. You've learned that society doesn't recognize its most essential workers. That invisibility can be both a burden and a kind of freedom. That people find meaning in work even when society doesn't value it. That meaning emerges from community, skill, and the satisfaction of work well done. Old Wim, the water carrier, is now approaching the end of his working years. His back is permanently bent. His knees barely support him. He can make perhaps 5 or 6 routes a day now, where he once made 10. But he's still working, still carrying water, still making jokes to the younger carriers about the eternal complaints of nobles. He knows that when he stops working, he'll be dependent on charity or the kindness of the younger carriers who've learned the trade from him. He knows that his life's work will be forgotten almost immediately. He also knows that he's been part of something real, something necessary, something that mattered. Heinrich, the master builder, is perhaps 20 years from the end of his working life. The cathedral section will be completed and, he hopes, will stand for centuries. He'll move on to the next project, the next city, continuing to build permanent structures that will outlast him. He has a certain satisfaction in knowing that his work creates permanence. Yet, he also knows that history won't record his name. The cathedral will be attributed to medieval builders, or to the noble who commissioned it. His specific skill, his specific genius, his specific contribution will be invisible. He finds peace in accepting this. The work is real, even if uncredited. Catherine, the royal servant, still works in the same household, though the Lord has changed once and the lady is younger now. She's become, over years, a kind of institution herself, the one who knows how things should work, the one who keeps the household functioning. She's still invisible, still underappreciated, still subject to the moods of her employers, but she's also developed a kind of power through her invisibility. She knows secrets. She understands the true functioning of the household in a way that the formal structure never acknowledges. She has the respect of the other servants. She's built a life here in her invisibility that has meaning and worth. What's remarkable about these 3 people, Old Wim, Heinrich, Catherine, is not their heroism or their exceptional qualities. It's precisely their ordinariness. They are not chosen ones or exceptional talents. They're ordinary people doing the work that needs to be done, under difficult circumstances, for modest compensation, without official recognition, and yet they've built something real. They've maintained a city. They've created permanent structures. They've made a household function. They've found community, humor, dignity, and meaning in their work. This is what you've learned in your hours here, that the profound transformations of society happen not through dramatic revolutions or exceptional figures, but through the accumulated, invisible work of ordinary people who show up day after day and do what needs to be done. The medieval water carrier didn't revolutionize water distribution or get recognized for his contribution to urban development. He simply carried water, day after day, year after year, for decades. This work was essential. It was invisible. It was poorly compensated. And it was real. The medieval town builder didn't become a famous architect remembered for centuries. He simply placed stone upon stone, according to the knowledge he'd acquired through years of apprenticeship and practice. This work created permanence. It was skilled, it required judgment and artistry, and it was performed by ordinary craftspeople whose names were never recorded. The medieval royal servant didn't write memoirs or leave historical records. She simply kept the household functioning, day after day, managing countless small tasks and crises, and moments where her attention to detail made the difference between order and chaos. This work was essential to the functioning of nobility, and therefore to the broader social structure. None of them are celebrated now. None of them achieved lasting fame, yet their work shaped the world. Their ingenuity, their resilience, their humor, their dignity, These shaped not just their own lives, but the broader fabric of medieval society. As you drift towards sleep now, let this be your final thought. The profound work of society is performed by ordinary people, often invisibly, often without recognition or adequate compensation. And yet they do it. They show up. They do what needs to be done. They find meaning and community in their work. They maintain dignity and humor even in difficult circumstances. This is the true lesson of the forgotten medieval professions. Not that they were forgotten, but that they mattered anyway. May you sleep well, knowing that the world is still kept functioning by ordinary people doing invisible work, just as it was in the late medieval period, just as it always has been and always will be. Good night. May your dreams carry you gently away, and may you wake refreshed, having visited a time that was simpler in some ways and more complex in others than our own. Sleep now and dream of water carriers and stone builders and loyal servants, keeping the medieval city alive, one bucket, one stone, one task at a time.